Good morning. I call this hearing to order. I request unanimous consent that the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. Hearing no objection, so ordered. Without objection, members will be recognized in order of committee seniority for questioning witnesses today. This will make it easier for me to ensure all members participating have an opportunity to be recognized. I want to welcome everyone to today's Economic Opportunity Subcommittee hearing, where we are reviewing 19 pieces of legislation. I thank the ranking member, our staff, and our VSO partners for their work on these bills and the drafts that span our jurisdiction. Several of today's proposals address veteran homelessness. With the recent end of the federal eviction moratorium and the COVID-19 pandemic continuing to cause significant financial strain on families throughout the country, it is critical that we work together to help veterans who are experiencing or at risk of homelessness. We'll be looking at Representative Negus's bill to increase and extend the authorization for the Homeless Veterans Reintegration Program, which connects veterans with employment opportunities and the tools they need to stay stably housed. We'll also examine several House companions to provisions from Senator Tester's Building Solutions for Veterans Experiencing Homelessness Act. 3 of these companions will make critical changes to the grant and per diem program. We'll look at Representative Williams' proposal to permanently adjust the maximum per diem rate for providers who shelter and deliver services to veterans transitioning out of homelessness. This will provide a long-needed change to ensure providers are being reimbursed for the actual cost of daily care for veterans in transitional housing. We'll also consider eliminating the capital grant matching requirement for organizations upgrading or building facilities to house veterans. The COVID-19 pandemic highlighted the need to pivot veterans' transitional housing from congregate settings to individualized environments, and this bill will give providers the latitude they need to upgrade or build safer facilities. Additionally, we'll examine Representative Torres' proposal to eliminate the cap on the amount of technical assistance that VA can provide to homeless service providers. Another 3 of the companions would establish pilot programs to increase access to public transportation, substance use disorder recovery services, and long-term care for veterans, particularly those at risk or experiencing homelessness. The final companion requires VA to report on the efficacy of the Supportive Services for Veteran Families Shallow Subsidy Program. This important program has helped thousands of veteran families who fell on hard times during the pandemic to maintain their housing in high-cost areas. The report required in this legislation will help guide future improvements to this vital resource. As usual, we also have a number of proposals related to veteran education and training benefits. To strengthen our support for student veterans and their families, we'll review my proposal that provides a weekly stipend for child care expenses. Access to affordable child care is one of the biggest barriers students face when pursuing or finishing their education. This bill will help student veterans access high-quality child care that allows them time to focus on their education so they can earn degrees that will better their families' lives. We'll also discuss my bill, which extends the delimiting date for use of certain education benefits. After VA changed its interpretation of the 48-month rule earlier this year, many veterans saw an increase in their entitlement to education benefits. However, several are unable to utilize these benefits due to their entitlement exceeding their delimiting date. My bill extends these veterans' delimiting dates to provide them sufficient time to use their earned benefits. We'll also review Representative Underwood's proposal to enhance protections for service members who must suspend their education to fulfill military orders. Next, we'll discuss expanding the VA work-study program to veterans enrolled in programs at a half-time basis or more, giving more student veterans the opportunity to earn and learn. We'll review a proposal to require a report on the Warrior Training Advancement Course, or WARTAC, program. This report will collect best practices from VA, which has been effective in hiring service members through WARTAC, that VA will distribute to other federal agencies to encourage participation. We'll also discuss a bill that allows for the full transfer of education assistance entitlement when an eligible individual dies or after approval of a transfer, but before transferring all of their entitlement to their dependent. Additionally, we'll look at a proposal that prohibits the use of survivor and dependents educational assistance for secondary school education, and a proposal that ensures service members who paid into the Montgomery GI Bill but elect to use the post 9/11 GI Bill get their money back. We'll also examine a bill related to educational assistance for flight training. And finally, we'll review the Fry Scholarship Enhancement Act, which expands the Marine Gunnery Sergeant John David Fry Scholarship to include spouses and children of individuals who die from a service-connected disability within 120 days of separating from the military. We have a lot to cover today, so I'll conclude my comments and recognize my friend Ranking Member Moore for any opening remarks he may have. Ranking Member Moore?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, and thank you. I appreciate the recognition. I also want to thank you for continuing the bipartisan tradition of this subcommittee by including 5 Republican proposals out of the 19 total bills being considered during today's legislative hearing. While I am generally supportive of the bills being considered today, pending scoring and offsets, I did have some questions about the draft bill that would expand the VA home loan program to authorize users to purchase a second home loan that is not tethered to the current entitlement rules. VA home loan program is an invaluable benefit to our nation's veterans. I want to ensure that by expanding this benefit, the program is meeting its original mission to help veterans achieve the American dream. I worry that in its current form, that this bill could put taxpayers on the hook for needless spending if defaults increase. That is why I was pleased late last night the chairman pulled the bill from the agenda. I look forward to working with Mr. Brown, the chairman, and all members on this legislation in the future to protect this valuable benefit. I would like to touch on my draft legislation that would expand FRI scholarship eligibility to spouses and children of veterans who die from service-connected disabilities within 120 days from separating from the military. I would like to thank the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors, or TAPS, for their help in drafting this legislation. Now I'm eager to hear how it will help the dependents of our fallen heroes. Other bills being considered today include Representative Cawthorn's bill, the HR 4874, and the Fly Vets Act, which would close a loophole that allows public flight schools to charge any amount of tuition and fees for flight instruction. This is a common sense bill that will close the loophole while still giving the veterans tools to complete their flight training. I'd like to thank my predecessor as ranking member of the subcommittee, Representative Bilirakis, for coming to speak on behalf of his bill, HR 5151, the Colonel James Floyd Turner, the 4th USMC GI Bill Transfer Act of 2021. If a veteran dies prior to allocating their transferred education benefits to their dependents, this bill would allow dependents to retain their eligibility for GI Bill benefits. This bill came about when a constituent of Mr. Bilirakis died by suicide, and the current law precluded the transfer of his education benefits to his daughter. Again, I want to thank Mr. Bilirakis for being here and for speaking in support of his bill today. I am supportive of other GOP draft bills being considered today, which include a bill that would authorize a way for service members to recoup the $1,200 they paid into the Montgomery GI Bill should they elect to use and exhaust their GI Bill eligibility on active duty, and a bill that would disallow students from using benefits from Dependents Education Assistance Program at secondary schools, which would allow for more dependents to use this valuable program on higher education. Finally, I want to thank our witnesses who are here to testify. I look forward to hearing how we can improve upon these pieces of legislation before us today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and with that, I yield back.
Thank the ranking member, and I share the ranking member's desire to continue doing things in a bipartisan manner on the subcommittee, and it's good to see my old friend, Representative Bilirakis, who was the ranking member in the last Congress. And with that, I'd like to call up Representative Neguse, Representative Strickland, Representative Williams, Representative Bilirakis, and Representative Cawthorn to join our first panel. If Representative Neguse, there he is, Representative Neguse, you are now recognized for 5 minutes. Good morning.
Good morning. Mr. Chairman, thanks so much for giving me the opportunity. If you might mind indulging me in 10 seconds so I can close this drape behind me.
Joe, I will give you as much time as you need because we want to be able to hear and see you. Joe, that is much better.
All right.
There you go. There you go. You got to have the lighting right. I mean,
just wanted to make sure. I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman, very much.
Again, Representative Neguse.
Thank you for your indulgence. Well, Chairman Takano and Chairman Levin, again, very honored today to be here to speak about HR 5025, the Veterans Job Training Act, a piece of legislation that would reauthorize the successful Homeless Veterans Reintegration Program through 2025. Funded by the U.S. Department of Labor, the HVRP program would reauthorize, or rather the HVRP program is the only federal grant to focus exclusively on competitive employment for homeless veterans. Our nation's service members upend their lives to serve our country And we need to make sure that when they come home, they can find meaningful work and provide for themselves and their families. Since 1988, DOL has used this program to offer job counseling, resume preparation, job placement, and follow-up at 30, 90, and 180-day intervals. The Government Accountability Office cited the HVRP program as one of the most effective, efficient federal homeless assistance programs in the country. The program connects employers directly with veterans who may be homeless and provides those homeless veterans with the financial resources that they may need to ultimately find a home and to find permanent employment. After all they've done for us, the least we can do for them is to strengthen job training programs to provide them with expanded career opportunities. Service members returning home are too often faced with unanticipated challenges as they adjust to civilian life. The Colorado Coalition for the Homeless, for example, estimates that veterans comprise 9% of the population of those experiencing homelessness. In Boulder County, part of my district in Colorado, veterans make up roughly 10% of the county's homeless population. It is simply unacceptable that those who gave so much for their country might experience such instability here at home. To tackle this critical issue, our programming for homeless veterans must be focused on getting veterans the resources that they need as quickly as possible to get back on their feet. HVRP sites are unique in their ability to use funds flexibly to help program participants secure and keep jobs. The program assists veterans with a number of steps, from securing a uniform to purchasing a set of tools to getting a state license needed to be hired for a position. At the end of the day, we have to continue to invest in programs that assist homeless veterans reintegrating into meaningful employment while stimulating the development of effective service delivery systems to address problems facing homeless veterans. The men and women of the armed forces sacrifice every day to keep us safe, and we owe them a debt of gratitude for their service, including ensuring that they can smoothly transition back into civilian life when they come home. Employers want to hire our veterans, and veterans want employment where skills and service is valued. This legislation would help make that happen. For those that have served us, we must serve them by ensuring they are equipped with the proper resources to thrive. And we can't allow for this program to expire. We have to reauthorize it and increase this funding immediately. So again, I urge my colleagues to support HR 5025 to help us get this done. And I want to thank Chairman Levin and Chairman Decano for their leadership and their partnership in this affair. Thank you so much. Yield back.
Thank you so much, Representative Neguse. Representative Strickland, you're now recognized.
Thank you, Chair Levin and Chair Takano, for inviting me to participate in this hearing today. And I want to thank the members of this committee for your dedication to improving the lives of our veterans and their families. Mr. Chair, I represent the 10th Congressional District of Washington State, which encompasses Joint Base Lewis-McChord, the largest military installation on the West Coast. JBLM, as it's known, is one of the most requested posts in the nation, and many military members and their families who serve at JBLM end up staying in the area, and for good reason. It's the same story of my family. My father fought in 2 wars and wanted to retire and in the Pacific Northwest when he left the service. And it's the same story that thousands of families share. In many ways, the South Sound is well suited for veterans and their families. We have a robust job market, the school systems are competitive, and the natural beauty cannot be matched. However, we also have a housing shortage because we have a rapidly growing population. Underinvestment in housing has created a very high cost of living, and veterans and their families often feel this most acutely, struggling to keep up in our red-hot real estate market. Veteran service providers also suffer as well. In the Puget Sound region alone, it is more expensive on a per diem basis to care for a veteran at risk of or experiencing homelessness than anywhere in the VISN 20 region of Washington, Oregon, Idaho, or Alaska. My bill, the Homes for Our Veterans Act, helps providers address this issue by eliminating the project matching requirement for the VA's grant per diem, or GPD, capital grants for the next 5 years. By removing this requirement, we will increase service providers' access to VA grant money, which will enable them to improve the quality and the type of their facilities. Critically, this includes transitioning those facilities away from the congregate care model and towards individual lodging. As the pandemic has demonstrated, congregate care can be a hotspot for virus transmission. Creating a safer and healthier environment is essential to ensuring that our veterans can recover from the pandemic. My legislation also eliminates the real property disposition requirement. And here's what this will do. It will enable providers to adapt their mission without financial penalty. Currently, a GPD recipient operating a transitional housing must buy the property back from the VA if they want to make changes to how that facility is used. This requirement is prohibitive and prevents organizations from adjusting the services they provide as circumstances shift because each community is unique. This provision has been a frequent source of complaints from GPD grant recipients. By eliminating it, we give local governments and nonprofits the flexibility to meet the challenges of their respective communities. Our veteran homelessness care infrastructure simply is insufficient for veterans who are struggling with rising housing costs. This creates housing insecurity, and too many vets sadly end up homeless and not able to meet their basic needs. We owe it to those who dedicated their lives to protecting us here at home and abroad, and we can do everything we can to protect them and give them the best possible chance to get up on their feet and have their basic needs met. By eliminating burdensome funding requirements for service providers, my bill will do just that. I thank you for the opportunity to testify. I urge my colleagues to support this legislation. Mr. Chair, I now yield back.
Thank you so much, Representative Strickland. Representative Williams, you're now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to my colleagues on the committee today for addressing this very important issue. As a kid, my family didn't always have much, but the one thing that we always had was a roof over our head. Unfortunately, too many of our veterans who have served our country can't say the same. And this is especially personal to me as my father served in Vietnam and came back struggling just to make ends meet. When our service members return home, we owe them more than a debt of gratitude. We owe more to the veterans in my district who call my office for casework help and has to list a bridge as his permanent home address. And we're seeing it so many times throughout my district. We owe more to our neighbors and loved ones who served our country with honor, but are unable to find affordable and stable housing when they return home. We owe more to the over 3,000 people in my home city, including veterans who are homeless on any given night. And we owe them all a chance to get ahead by treating housing as a basic human right. There's a long road ahead to making housing affordable and accessible for all. In the Metro Atlanta area, there are only 29 affordable and available housing units per 100 extremely low income households. And that's below the national average, which is still only 37 per 100. These alarming numbers underscore why my colleagues and I are hard at work implementing this administration's vision to invest in housing as essential infrastructure. We currently have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to ensure so many of us have a decent home, and I'll keep working to make sure housing is accessible for all. We have a great deal to do to achieve the promise of America. One thing that we should all be able to agree on is ensuring that veterans have a place to live as they transition from homelessness to permanent housing. So today I'm announcing my bill, the Return Home to Housing Act, which will ensure that providers can cover the cost of offering transitional housing to our nation's veterans. My bill will raise the maximum reimbursement that the VA can give providers for supplying transitional housing. Under current law, after the pandemic ends, providers in only 1 in 5 regions will be able to get reimbursed enough to meet the actual cost. My bill would ensure that providers in a majority of regions are financially able to house our veterans. This bill is a common sense solution that will help us do right by those who have bravely served our country. That's why this legislation was passed unanimously out of the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs when it was included as a part of the Building Solutions for Veterans Experiencing Homelessness Act. I urge my colleagues on the House Committee of Veterans Affairs to support this bill when it is introduced this week, and I look forward to the opportunity to work together with all of you to make this legislative fix for our nation's heroes. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you so much, Representative Williams. I'd next like to welcome back to the House Veterans Affairs Committee my good friend from Florida, Gus Bilirakis. And Gus, it's great to see you. I'm very proud of our record of bipartisan work together in the 116th Congress. We're doing all we can to move that forward with Ranking Member Moore in the 117th. With that, Representative Bilirakis, you're now recognized.
Thank you very much. I really miss this committee. You can tell, I think I've been back 4 times. since then. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity, and of course, Ranking Member Moore, and great job, Representative Williams, on your bill. All of you have done an outstanding job. I see my buddy here, my fellow Greek, Mr. Pappas. Good to see him too. He's doing good work. I want to thank you for holding this important legislative hearing. It's an honor to speak before the committee this morning and advocate on behalf of my bill. For most of my congressional career, as you know, I've sat on the other side of the dais participating as a member of this committee. And I often find myself in awe of the sacrifices and efforts that have been made on behalf of our great country by the men and women who have worn the uniform of our armed services. Providing for these veterans and their families is still one of my top priorities. And even though I'm not a member of the committee, I will continue to stand alongside the great work you are doing. And you are doing great work, Mr. Chairman, along with the Ranking Member Moore. Keep it up. My bill, the Colonel James Floyd Turner, the fourth, the USMC GI Transfer Act of 2021, is named after one of my constituents whose untimely death via suicide complicated and eventually prevented his daughter from continuing to use his GI Bill benefits that she was entitled to. The Turner's tragic story was brought about by what he believed and what ultimately was a result of the VA failing him and his family. Growing up in Baltimore, Jim felt the call to duty and joined the Marine Corps. He flew F-18s and then became an infantry officer, taking part in the invasion of Iraq in 2003. He later served in Afghanistan and spent a decade working at U.S. Central Command at MacDill Air Force Base. Turner admirably served our country for over 20 years, receiving the highest marks for his professionalism, commitment to the mission, and his superior leadership. However, his service and sacrifice resulted in severe PTS, which only became worse after his retirement. It was from his frustration at the lack of ability to get help from the VA that he made the decision in his dress uniform and medals to take his life in the parking lot of the Bay Pines Department of Veterans Affairs complex in St. Petersburg. While I know many of you, like myself, are committed to providing for the mental health of our veterans, we must do more for the veterans in need. These heroes sacrificed their blood, sweat, tears, and for many of them, their lives to serve and protect our country. We must do our part to provide the care and treatment they deserve. In Jim's case, we can make sure that his daughter and others that tragically find themselves in her situation can use the benefits that were intended for her to get a quality education. Colonel Turner had transferred one of his 33 months of benefit before his passing, but had indicated in both his divorce decree and his suicide note that he fully intended to transfer the entire benefit to his daughter. My bill would provide for the transfer of educational benefits in special circumstances after approval of transfer and before transferring all of the individual's entitlements. The bill would allow dependents to receive the benefits equally and transfer it among themselves via the Forever GI Bill, allowing for full equity if there is a significant disagreement among the family on how to use the benefit. This bill is a simple fix that could make a world of difference for our veterans and their families. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for hearing my bill and members of the committee again for having this hearing and inviting me to testify. You're doing great work. Keep it up. God bless. And I yield back.
Well, thank you very much for the kind words and for all your good work as well, Representative Bilirakis. Representative Cawthorn, you are now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to my dear friend, Ranking Member Moore. I rise today in defense of our veterans and to be a good steward of the American taxpayer dollars. Several years ago, it came to light that some public flight schools were exploiting a loophole in the post 9/11 GI Bill allowing them to charge an unlimited amount of tuition and fees for flight training. This was allowed because under current law, any flight institution can charge as much as they please for in-state tuition, as long as they can show that 15% of their participants are not using GI Bill funds. In one instance, a public school charged over $500,000 to the American taxpayer for one student's flight program. Sadly, this is not the only example. VA data shows that while that number of students taking flight training went up by only 171 students, or 9%, between the fiscal years 2013 and 2014. The total cost to taxpayers for this program grew by 37 million, or 87%, during the same period. My bill, HR 4874, the Fly Vets Act, fixes several issues. First, it fixes the licensing issue by allowing veterans to pay for their training to obtain a private pilot's license via their GI Bill entitlement. Previously, the cost for this training stage had to come out of the veteran's pocket. Second, capping the amount of GI Bill funding public institutions can receive will make it possible for post 9/11 GI Bill recipients to be 100% covered from the moment they step foot in school to the moment they are licensed to take flight. Let me be clear, this bill would not eliminate flight training for veterans using their GI benefits to pay for training, nor would it cut GI benefits in any way. The bill would simply align the amount of tuition and fees allowable for flight training at a public institution of higher learning with the existing cap on tuition and fees for private and nonprofit schools at $25,162 a year. The cap is subject to an annual cost of living increase that goes into effect each August. This is the same cap that applies to tuition fees at all other private IHL programs, like Harvard, Stanford, and even private law and medical schools. Under this bill, students could also accelerate their payments, which would mean that instead of 36 months of benefits, they would have 18 months of benefits at double the rate, allowing them to use $50,324 a year to cover the higher cost of flight training. So this would mean that the total cost would be well over $100,000, which is on average with what a flight school costs. My bill will save Americans millions because it transforms an unregulated cash cow into a cap system, which, like I mentioned, already mirrors what is already in place for private and nonprofit flight schools. The idea of capping public flight schools' revenue from taxpayers isn't new. This provision has been proposed every year by both Republicans and Democrats since 2016. It was brought forward to the National Association of State Approving Agencies and has also been supported in the past by many veteran service organizations, including in this Congress by the American Legion, Student Veterans of America, the Fleet Reserve Association, and AGIF. My bill addresses the concerns of veterans and taxpayers by closing this loophole while simultaneously providing a way for students to pay for flight training through accelerated benefits based off data provided by the VA. For 2020, the school cap restrictions alone will cover the cost per student for public flight schools. The Congressional Budget Office has also confirmed that this bill would not increase nor decrease schools' revenue by any significant amount. It is time we stop exploiting veterans who laid their lives on the line for this country and stop stealing money from taxpayers who are trying to keep food on their table. Passing the Fly Vets Act provides a solution to both. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Cawthorn. Do any members have any questions for this esteemed panel? Hearing none, the panel is now excused. Thank you, members, for all of your legislation. We'll now begin our second panel, consisting of representatives from the Department of Veterans Affairs. All right, give everybody a minute. Good morning, good morning.
Morning, sir.
First, we have Mr. Ron Burke, Principal Deputy Undersecretary for Policy and Oversight for the Veterans Benefits Administration. Nice to see you.
Thanks, sir.
Mr. Burke is accompanied by Ms. Monica Diaz, Deputy Director for Program Management for Education Services for the Veterans Benefits Administration. Thank you both so much for joining the subcommittee this morning. With that, I'd now like to recognize Mr. Burke for 5 minutes. Mr. Burke, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman Levin, Ranking Member Moore, and other members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting us here today to discuss pending legislation which would affect the Department of Veterans Affairs programs and services. Joining me is Monica Diaz, Executive Director of Homeless Programs in the Veterans Health Administration. VA offers support for the majority of the proposed legislation before us today. As detailed within my testimony transcript, we have outlined suggested amendments and areas of concern and support. A fundamental priority for the VA is ensuring that our veterans succeed and realize opportunities worthy of their skills, talents, and service. Rather than provide remarks on the specific bills, I would like to highlight a few areas of focus for VA, which continue to have profound effects on our delivery of service and positive outcomes for those that we serve. VA remains committed to preventing and ending veteran homelessness. We can and will get there, but no one agency or group can end veteran homelessness alone. The effort to do so is a collaboration between federal, state, and local governments, and most importantly, the local community. We recognize that ending veteran homelessness requires deliberate effort and strategic action designed to achieve the goal. Our goal is a systemic end to veteran homelessness to ensure that every veteran has permanent, sustainable housing with access to high-quality health care and other supportive services, and that veteran homelessness in the future is prevented whenever possible or is otherwise rare, brief, and non-recurring. While veteran homelessness has decreased by 50% since 2010, progress in recent years has stalled. It is now incumbent on all of us to rejuvenate this effort and devise strategies to address new challenges. VA remains focused on promoting education and training opportunities and is presently in the middle of a modernization effort to improve the GI Bill program. In addition, innovative initiatives like the Veteran Rapid Retraining Assistance Program, or VRAP, and the Veteran Employment Through Technology Education course, VETTech, provide opportunities for eligible veterans and service members to seek training to support employment in high-demand fields. VA currently reports over 1,600 VRAP participants and has obligated over $46 million in funding. Due to the popularity of VETTech, VA had exhausted the available funding for fiscal year 2021. With the need to increase support during these economically challenging times, VA launched the Personalized Career Planning and Guidance Program. This program provides an opportunity for service members, veterans, and dependents to receive personalized counseling and support to help guide their career paths, ensure the most effective use of their VA benefits, and achieve their career goals. VBA processed over 5,000 applications within the first 5 months of launching this program. More veterans are turning to the Veteran Readiness and Employment Program for assistance with employment and education. In fiscal year 2021, VRE has achieved over 10,000 employment rehabilitations and expanded opportunities for over 325 veterans to participate in the non-paid work experience. VRE continues to collaborate with partners to hold career fair events for program participants and other veterans. Across VA, we are committed to providing the high-quality care our veterans have earned and deserve. We continue to improve services to meet the needs of our veterans, service members, and their families. We are grateful for the resources that Congress has provided to VA and pledge to do all that we can to ensure they are used as effectively and efficiently as possible. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss these invaluable services to veterans. We look forward to working with you on the proposed legislation. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my testimony. My colleague and I are prepared to respond to any questions you or other members of the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Burke. And also, I would be remiss if I did not mention that I got the title wrong for Ms. Diaz, who's actually the Executive Director of the VHA Program Office. Thank you very much, Ms. Diaz. With that, I'd like to begin by recognizing myself for 5 minutes for the question portion of the hearing. Mr. Burke, I wanted to thank you for your testimony regarding my draft bill to extend the delimiting date for education benefits that were restored under VA's new interpretation of the 48-month rule. Can you start by briefly explaining VA's new interpretation of the 48-month rule and how it resulted in the restoration of some veterans' education benefits?
Well, so this proposed legislation actually requires VA to extend the delimiting date of individuals who received restoration of entitlement as a result of VA's determination in April 2021 Our interpretation was that individuals may use assistance under Chapter 31 before using other VA educational assistance without being subject to the 48-month limitation. And with this proposed piece of legislation, this is one that VA supports.
Thank you for that. And correct me if I'm wrong about this, but while this new interpretation increased education benefits for many veterans, nearly 2,700 will not be able to use these benefits before they reach their delimiting date. Can you briefly discuss how this bill will help those individuals?
Yes, sir. The proposed bill would actually provide beneficiaries who recently received additional months of entitlement by virtue of our recent change, more time to use the benefits for which they're entitled. So again, it's one of the reasons that led VA to say, without a doubt, we support this proposed piece of legislation.
Terrific. Appreciate that. I wanted to turn to my draft bill to create a weekly stipend for childcare for student veterans. I appreciated the changes to legislation that VA proposed that would expand the stipend to students using other VA education benefits beyond the post 9/11 GI Bill. Could you please discuss how the stipend will improve outcomes for student veterans in completing their education and their familial obligations?
Yes, sir. Actually, this is one that VA supports the intent of this proposed legislation, as it provides veterans the opportunity to achieve higher education while assisting in the financial cost of child care services. But I would be remiss if I didn't state that we cannot support without congressional appropriation of the resources to fund these requirements. The proposed legislation would provide veterans the opportunity to achieve higher education while assisting in the financial cost of child care services. Again, we do support, and we did provide a few amendments for consideration as well.
Understood, and I appreciate that. Under the text as written, would VA allow non-veteran students using transferred benefits to receive the child care stipend, or would additional authorities be needed to do so?
I know that we had asked in our proposed amendment to relocate the authority, which would make it generally applicable to all VA education benefit beneficiaries. But again, I would offer our technical assistance to work with you and your staff, sir, on any other amendments and revisions to fulfill the full intent of this proposed legislation.
Thank you for that. And I'm sure our staff would welcome that opportunity as well. Lastly, I wanted to discuss the draft legislation requiring VA to share best practices from the WARTAC program with other federal agencies. I wanted to commend VA for its success carrying out this program, which has graduated hundreds of service members since its inception in 2014. Mr. Burke, you mentioned that VA recommends that information about WARTAC be shared with service members before they begin the transition assistance program. So my question is VA working with the Department of Defense to institute this change, or does it need legislative authority to do so?
So, sir, we are working with the Department of Defense to expand the saturation rate, if you will, of this very valuable program. We are interested in increasing WARTAC. It has been a very valuable process or tool, rather, not only for us, but for our service members. I will say that as part of this proposed legislation, we have been sharing a whole host of data and reports with our VSO communities. We don't believe that a congressionally mandated report is necessary. We would like the opportunity to share what we provide to our VSO partners on a quarterly basis to see if that meets the intent of the proposed legislation, and more than happy, sir, to work with you and the committee members to review exactly what we do report out on.
Well, thank you very much for that, Mr. Burke, and I certainly appreciate the spirit of collaboration as we work to refine this legislation and get it across the finish line, along with some of the other bills that we've been discussing this morning. With that, I'd like to recognize my friend, the ranking member, for his questions.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, panelists, for participating today. Mr. Burke, first question I want to ask is, can you please tell us more about why the department supports closing the flight school loophole at public institutions?
So we are supportive of multiple provisions within this proposed legislation. I think we provided in the actual breakdown of the testimony. There are elements where we support as written, but there are a few elements, sections of the proposed legislation that we would like to work with with you and the members of the committee on for potential adjustments. Section 2A1 is an element that we support. Section 2A2 has some issues and concerns that we don't support as written, but are willing to collaborate and work to provide some technical assistance. Section 2B has a few problematic areas that we would like to work with Congress to strengthen. And then we do support Section 2C and 2D. But overall, over the course of the post 9/11 GI Bill, there has been an increase in flight training centers, typically those that offer helicopter training, that have contracted with public IHLs and other flight-related degrees. We think the Fly Vets Act legislation is necessary, but again, would like to work with Congress on a few amendments as we see that could strengthen the intent of this legislation.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I have a number of, with Fort Rucker in my district, so many rotor wing pilots that go out and get training afterwards, you know, when they leave the Army, or sometimes just an additional to get a fixed wing certification. But I can understand it gets pretty costly too. So look forward to working with you on that. And I think it'd be a good piece of legislation.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right, I have another question as well. Can you please briefly describe the challenges the draft bill to eliminate the home loan for the second homes could create? Or
Sure.
home loan limit, let me say it that way, Mr. Burke, the home loan limit for the second loans could create.
So on the home loan, that one, I believe we were notified prior to the hearing that wouldn't be part of today's hearing. I'm happy to work with you outside of this hearing session, sir, if possible, you and your staff, to have a further detailed discussion about some of the challenges with respect to that proposed legislation.
Yeah, we talked about it briefly in the other panel. It was removed. I just thought it might be something to kind of keep on the radar screen. So appreciate it. And
yes, sir.
Let's see here. I got one more. And could you tell me, Mr. Burke, on what impact will there be on a majority of the Chapter 35 DEA students if the draft bill to eliminate secondary schools was enacted?
I'm sorry, but which one was that, sir? I apologize.
It was question 4. It was, what impact will there be on a majority of the Chapter 35 DEA students if the draft bill to eliminate secondary schools was enacted?
I have to be honest with you, I'm drawing a blank on this, sir. I apologize. I will have to get back. I'll take that one for the record and get back to you. My apologies, sir.
Okay, no worries, no worries. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I think I'm going to yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the ranking member. Are there any other members who have questions for our panel? Going once, going twice. All right, well, I very much appreciate Mr. Burke and Ms. Diaz for joining us. And we'll now move on to our third panel, consisting of representatives from veteran service organizations. So go ahead and if we can get the virtual change over to our all right, I think I see everybody. Hello, everyone. Good morning. I'd like to now introduce our representatives from veteran service organizations. First, we have Tony Lewis, Associate National Legislative Director for Disabled American Veterans. Good morning. After that, we have Catherine Monet, Chief Executive Officer for the National Coalition for Homeless Veterans. Nice to see you. Next, we have Lauren Augustine, Vice President of Government for the Student Veterans of America. Lauren, good morning. Nice to see you. After that is Ashlyn Haycock, Deputy Director of Policy and Legislation for the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors. Nice to see you again. Good morning. After that, we have David Proferis, Education and Credentialing Policy Associate at the American Legion. Good morning. And then finally, we have a new organization for this committee, the American GI Forum. Testifying on their behalf is National Commander Lawrence Guzman Romo. Welcome, Commander Romo. It's nice to have you here. With that, I'll now begin by recognizing Mr. Lewis for 5 minutes. Mr. Lewis, take it away.
Thank you. Chairman Levin, Ranking Member Moore, and members of the subcommittee. On behalf of DAV's more than 1 million members who all have service-connected injuries, illnesses, and diseases, We thank you for the opportunity to offer our views on the legislation currently before this subcommittee. My written statement details our position on the legislation and on the agenda. However, today I'll focus my remarks mainly on the bills related to veteran homelessness. Year after year, DAV's membership reaffirms its commitment to eliminating homelessness among veterans. Many veterans experience post-deployment readjustment conditions, substance use disorders, or traumatic brain injuries that make their participation in the workforce difficult or even impossible, making them more likely to become homeless. Because these conditions were acquired during or worsened by their military service, we believe our country has a unique responsibility to assist these veterans in obtaining permanent housing and to provide economic opportunities. In keeping with this belief, DAV strongly supports the draft legislation to increase the authorization level of Department of Labor's Homeless Veterans Reintegration Program, or HVRP. These programs focus exclusively on competitive employment for homeless veterans by offering job counseling, resume preparation, and job placement. They also ensure that participants receive essential support services such as clothing, shelter, referral to medical or substance abuse treatments, and transportation assistance. Employment assistance programs like HVRP are in high demand among unemployed veterans. For instance, the Veteran Rapid Retraining Assistance Program, or VRAP, offers education and training to veterans who are unemployed because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But VRAP is a temporary program and is scheduled to end in December of 2022. For this reason, we urge Congress to consider increasing the funding authorization level for HVRP above what is recommended in this draft legislation. We believe that an effective program like HVRP will be in even greater demand when VRAP ends. Mr. Chairman, as you know, one major element of VA's strategy to eliminate veteran homelessness is partnership with faith-based and community nonprofit organizations that provide housing and services to homeless veterans. These partnerships have proven invaluable, and for that reason, DAV supports legislation that removes obstacles to these organizations providing services to veterans. We strongly support the draft bill that eliminates the matching funding requirement for VA grantees who provide comprehensive service to homeless veterans. Removing this requirement would allow more organizations to apply for these grants and give them the funding flexibility to provide adequate services to unhoused veterans. Likewise, the draft legislation that would provide technical assistance to homeless grant and per diem providers would ease those grantees' administrative responsibilities and allow them to more efficiently provide high-quality services to veterans and their families. DAV strongly supports both these draft bills. Lastly, women veterans face a unique set of circumstances that increase their risk of becoming homeless. Chief among them is childcare. DAV supports the draft legislation that would provide a weekly stipend for childcare services to veterans who are utilizing the post-9/11 GI Bill. However, we feel that this legislation should be expanded to include veterans who are enrolled in VR&E programs, veterans participating in the various homeless training programs, and survivors and dependents who are receiving Chapter 35 education assistance as well. Child care assistance would remove a major obstacles for veterans, especially women veterans, as they attempt to regain their personal empowerment and economic independence. Mr. Chairman, in conclusion, I'll point out that the events commemorating the September 11th attacks and the recent events in Afghanistan have roused many emotions in U.S. veterans of all eras. It's as important now as ever that we address the mental health, substance abuse, and employment needs of our veterans so they don't descend into the spiral of problems that often lead to homelessness. Our nation's veterans deserve no less than our best effort. Again, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm happy to address any questions you or members of the subcommittee have.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lewis, and I certainly share your sentiments. Next up, we have Ms. Monet. I now recognize Ms. Monet for 5 minutes. Go right ahead.
Chairman Levin, Ranking Member Moore, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to join you. Today's hearing is a testament to this committee's continuing ability to proactively look for those tools and new opportunities to better serve veterans experiencing or at risk of homelessness. I will limit NCHV's feedback today to those legislative proposals that directly impact the state of veteran homelessness. NCHV supports the discussion draft adjustments of grants awarded by the Secretary of Veterans Affairs for comprehensive service programs that serve homeless veterans. The pandemic response made clear that individualized transitional housing options are a safer alternative to congregate settings for veterans. This legislation builds upon the commitment Congress made in Public Law 116-315 to extend the duration VA is allowed to issue capital grants for facility upgrades. NCHV supports the discussion draft pilot program on grants for healthcare for homeless veterans. This pilot would provide stable housing and appropriate medical care for veterans while they await placement in long-term care. This proposed pilot would give eligible veterans the care they need while keeping them from cycling between the hospital, unsheltered situations, and transitional housing that may not have the supports needed to serve them adequately. NCHV supports a discussion draft pilot program on award of grants for substance use disorder recovery for homeless veterans. This program increases homeless veterans' access to substance use disorder recovery programs in the community. Addressing the longer-term underlying conditions related to homelessness can support longer-term housing stability for veterans struggling with SUDS and other co-occurring disorders. NCHV supports the discussion draft training and technical assistance provided by Secretary of Veterans Affairs to recipients of certain financial assistance. Technical assistance is an important investment in ensuring federal funds are spent efficiently and effectively in any major federal program. This legislation would allow VA to provide training commensurate with the growth of these programs and the expansion of their offerings. Of note, it is also important to ensure that the President's budget request and ultimately your appropriations bills support sufficient staffing funding for major grant programs within VA's Homeless Programs Office to allow them to execute recent legislative changes well. NCHV supports the discussion draft adjustments to the rate of per diem payments provided by the Secretary of Veterans Affairs for services furnished to homeless veterans. We thank you for the improvements Congress made in Public Law 116-315 to raise the grant and per diem rate up to 300% during the COVID crisis and to 115% of the rate after the pandemic. However, that rate is still insufficient for providers to reasonably meet the needs of the veterans they serve. Here are some things we know. Many providers were operating at the maximum per diem rate prior to the pandemic, and more than half were operating within 200% of the rate as of May 2021. Even as emergency declarations are lifted, providers will still need to maintain adequate sanitation protocols to ensure safety for the veterans they serve and their staff. The push to decongregate shelter spaces is much needed, but it will require additional staff to support a larger facility footprint. And there is a direct correlation between the per diem reimbursement rate and the quality of facilities, services, and supports grantees are able to offer to veterans. Unhoused veterans have earned the right to dignity as they get back on their feet. NCHV supports the discussion draft report on shallow subsidy program under the SSVF program. VA has been testing a shallow subsidy program, which allows SSVF grantees to support eligible veterans over a longer horizon by paying no more than 35% of the fair market rent for up to 2 years. The program has recently been expanded to communities nationwide. An additional study can help further refine program guidelines. NCHV supports the discussion draft pilot program on grants to improve public transportation services for veterans. One of the most prominent difficulties veterans struggling with housing face is access to transportation, not just to reach VA facilities, but also to reach places of employment, food, and other essentials. NCHV supports HR 5025 to amend the United States Code to increase and extend the authorization of the HVRP program. The HVRP program has helped unhoused veterans access long-term, meaningful employment and is key to ending homelessness. The program has long been underfunded, but achieves great results for participants. As of June 30th, the program had about a 63% placement rate with jobs paying an average of $15.18, which is really good. In summation, I thank you for the opportunity to submit this testimony and for your continued interest in ending veteran homelessness. It's a privilege to work with all of you and your staff to ensure that every veteran facing a housing crisis has access to safe, decent, and affordable housing paired with the supportive services they need to remain stably housed.
Thank you so much, Ms. Monet, and it's a privilege to work with you as well. I now recognize Ms. Augustine for 5 minutes.
Chairman Levin, Ranking Member Moore, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for allowing Student Veterans of America to testify on several of the bills pending before the subcommittee. With more than 1,500 on-campus chapters, Student Veterans of America is committed to the empowerment of yesterday's warriors. Through a supportive network of chapter leaders, SVA works to transform the skills and experience of student veterans to ensure they achieve their greatest potential. Before discussing the specifics of bills before you today, I would be remiss if I did not take the opportunity to request further conversations on how we can continue supporting student veterans through the ongoing pandemic. This subcommittee has been incredibly supportive of the needs of student veterans over the last 18 months. Unfortunately, as COVID continues to impact us all, that support is still needed, both through an extension of existing temporary protections and continued work around what protections can be made permanent for future national emergencies. We look forward to working with you on those issues. As for the bills before you today, several of them are among SVA's top policy priorities or stem from SVA engagement with chapter leaders, which I will highlight today. We appreciate the commitment to acting on the concerns and needs raised directly by student veterans. The draft bill expanding protections under the Service Member Civil Relief Act is a high priority for SVA. A concern around how GI Bill benefits are protected or not protected for Guard and Reserve students has been shared by student veterans at nearly all of our programming events over the last few years. For example, 2 years ago, while at a Veterans Center ribbon cutting at Penn State, some of the chapter members shared a serious concern with short-term deployments and a dependency on understanding professors to be successful during such activations. Soon after, when the pandemic hit in earnest, we had Guard and Reserve students continue to share concerns around the increase in activations and what that might mean for their benefits. This all led to our team to conduct a state-by-state analysis of the existing GI Bill protections at the state level to identify best practices. Some of those best practices are reflected in this draft bill. We appreciate the work that has gone into this draft bill and look forward to working with Congresswoman Underwood and her staff to address any concerns within the language. Similarly, SVA is supportive of and thankful for the inclusion of the draft language creating a child care stipend for student veterans. This bill idea came directly from a VFW SVA legislative fellow and SVA chapter leader, Ilana Kearney from Evergreen State College. Ilana stressed the need for child care stipends that allow for greater flexibility to use non-traditional child care options like trusted family and neighbors for short-term help during evenings and weekends when traditional child care centers are closed. This same type of childcare need has been shared with SVA by many other chapter leaders across the country. There is a great need for childcare options when students are most often doing group work or studying, evenings and weekends. This makes sense considering the 2020 SVA census found 53% of respondents were parents. We are excited to work with the subcommittee to address the remaining concerns and questions within the draft language and ultimately see a new option for childcare assistance available to student veterans. Last, I'd like to express our support for the work study draft bill, which would increase eligibility for VA work study to students enrolled at a half-time basis. Much like the other two issues highlighted before, concerns or support for VA work study are among the top issues raised by chapter leaders during SVA programming events and was an issue raised by another VFW SVA legislative fellow earlier this year. Again, this makes sense when looking at student veteran demographics. While VA education benefits are very generous, we know they often do not cover all expenses or needs of students while in school. According to the 2020 SVA census, 63% of respondents were employed. Increasing access to employment options like VA work study will help support student veterans looking for employment while also providing opportunities to serve their fellow veterans. I'd like to again express our appreciation for this subcommittee's commitment to acting on the issues raised by student veterans themselves, issues that focus on how to best support their success on campus and beyond, like childcare and employment. That commitment is clearly reflected in these bills. Thank you for your time, attention, and devotion to the cause of veterans in higher education. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Ms. Augustine. I now recognize Ms. Haycock for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Levin, Ranking Member Moore, and distinguished committee members. The Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors thanks you for the opportunity to testify on behalf of the nearly 500,000 military and veteran survivors impacted by the work of this committee. TAPS is supportive of many of the bills being discussed today, but we specifically want to express our support for the 4 that impact the survivor community. Education issues are incredibly important to surviving families, and TAPS continues to fight for improvements to these benefits. Long-term, TAPS would like to sunset Chapter 35 and move everyone into the Fry Scholarship, but we recognize that doing so would be very expensive. Instead, we are working to gradually move survivors into the Fry Scholarship to help lower the overall price tag. Last year, the Fry Scholarship Improvement Act brought parity to survivors whose loved ones died while serving in the Guard and Reserve. This year, we would like to bring equity to the families who die in the 120-day release from active duty period. Those who die during the 120-day refrad period are eligible for every other benefit available to active duty survivors, such as the SGLI, death gratuity, TRICARE for life, DIC, and SPP, but they are excluded from the Fry Scholarship. Passing this bill would provide long overdue parity for these surviving families. Some surviving spouses, such as Astrid Rushford, lost their loved ones within hours of separation from service. Astrid's husband, Technical Sergeant Richard Rushford, attempted suicide in December 2001. While Tech Sergeant Rushford was on life support, he was medically retired effective immediately. He passed from his injuries a few hours later. Because of the service's decision, Astrid and her 2 children are not eligible for the Fry Scholarship. She is one of hundreds of surviving family members who view themselves as active duty losses, but are denied benefits due to a technicality. TAPS is supportive of the draft to create childcare vouchers for GI Bill recipients, but requests the inclusion of both the Fry Scholarship and Chapter 35 recipients. While veterans may be single parents, Fry Scholarship recipients are guaranteed to be single parents as the other parent is deceased. In many cases, these survivors have a much larger need for the childcare vouchers. The average post-9/11 military widow is 25 years old with 2 children at the time of the loss. Most put off going back to school to pursue higher education until their children are in high school or college due to the demands of being a single parent and not having adequate support. Granting childcare vouchers to surviving spouses using education benefits would allow them to go back to school earlier and in the long term be better able to financially support themselves and their families. In addition, TAPS would like to ensure surviving children who are using benefits are also eligible. Eligibility for surviving children for the Fry Scholarship ends at age 33, or does not end at all due to the Forever GI Bill. Therefore, many of them have families of their own while using benefits. We would also like to express our support for the Chapter 35 draft. The intent of VA educational benefits is to cover post-high school education. However, there is a loophole from the 1950s that allows students to receive dependents educational assistance while still in high school. The original intent was to allow widows who were still in high school to utilize VA college education benefits for remedial training. This was a fairly common occurrence in the Vietnam era, when many of those who died in Vietnam were 18 or 19 years old and left behind spouses who were the same age or younger. While TAP supports the need for remedial training, usually provided by colleges, we do not believe the intent was to pay for surviving children who are in high school. Those children are already eligible to receive dependency and indemnity compensation if they are over 18, but still in school. The technicality takes away from the purpose of Chapter 35, which is to assist in the cost of paying for a college education. As part of this process, state approving agencies are required to approve the educational institution. This is an undue burden on the SAAs, whose job should be to approve college, technical, and trade programs, not high schools. The SAAs should be focused on making sure survivors and veterans have access to quality higher education. TAP supports maintaining the intent of the program and closing this loophole. Transferability has always been a complicated issue. Service members are encouraged to transfer just 1 month to each child or spouse as a placeholder, knowing they can adjust these months as the children get closer to college age. Sadly, we have seen many cases where the service member or veteran passes before reallocating those remaining months. While TAP supports the intent of the legislation, our concerns lie with when there are multiple beneficiaries. Family dynamics are complicated and grief tends to exacerbate them. Frequently, we see situations where there are multiple children from the same service member living in different households, or children living with a parent that was not the spouse of the service member. TAPS wants to ensure that the benefits are split equitably in situations like this, so that all eligible beneficiaries get the same number of months of the entitlement and allow them to reallocate as they see fit, something we allowed to happen under the Forever GI Bill. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Ms. Haycock. I now recognize Mr. Proferis for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Levin, Ranking Member Moore, and distinguished members of the committee, on behalf of the National Commander, Paul Dillard, and the nearly 2 million members of the American Legion, we thank you for inviting the American Legion to testify today. Due to the allotted time available, I will briefly speak on 2 pieces of legislation and an urgent National Guard issue. First, we would like to address H.R. 4874, the Fly Vets Act, that establishes a cap on tuition and fees covered by the post-9/11 GI Bill for public flight schools. The American Legion supports the continued improvement of the GI Bill and thanks this committee for the work it does to that end. At the same time, we understand the importance of ensuring that public funds are spent responsibly. It has come to the American Legion's attention that tuition and fees at flight schools have increased dramatically, costing taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars per student. Flight schools have inflated prices and been successful doing so by exploiting an unforeseen and unintentional loophole in the post 9/11 GI Bill. The generous education entitlement caps yearly tuition and fees for private schools, but does not cap tuition and fees for public schools. HR 4874 would close this loophole by capping tuition and fees for flight schools at $25,162 per year. Additionally, to not hinder veterans wishing to pursue flight school, this draft legislation would allow veterans to accelerate their education entitlement into 1 year of flight school. The American Legion welcomes Representative Cawthorn's measured approach on this issue. We would also like to address the draft legislation that amends the Service Members Civil Relief Act. The Service Members Civil Relief Act has thus far provided robust protections to active duty reservists and National Guard service members on active duty. However, higher education is notably absent from this act. Service members can be negatively impacted both academically and financially by schools due to training or deployment obligations which take them out of classes. The draft legislation would correct this oversight by allowing service members who receive active duty or inactive duty orders to withdraw or take a leave of absence from classes without facing adverse actions by academic institutions. The American Legion supports the additional protections that would be afforded under this draft legislation and applauds the members and staff that highlighted this important issue. To improve this bill, we would suggest stipulating a minimum number of days within a month that a service member can attend class due to service status. In addition to the draft legislation on the docket today, we recommend further actions be taken to close a medical discharge loophole affecting National Guard service members. In 2011, an Ohio National Guard service member deployed to Afghanistan and developed a rare disorder, exercise-induced anaphylaxis, as a result of his duties on deployment. He was released from active duty to his unit, underwent a medical evaluation board, and then was medically retired from his home station using the standard National Guard discharge form NGB-22. During his out processing, he was told by the VA that because the retirement resulted from a service-connected disability obtained while on active duty, his GI Bill would be increased from 60% to 100%. However, only later did VA inform him that he was only entitled to 60%, which was the total active duty service time he had before sustaining injuries. It was at this point he contacted the American Legion. We pursued the issue with the VA, convinced that what happened to the service member was wrong, but the VA stood by the ruling. The GI Bill entitles 100% of GI Bill eligibility after discharge or release from active duty in the armed forces for a service-connected disability. Because the service member's medical discharge was from the National Guard via NGB-22, it did not count and he was considered ineligible, even with the paper trail showing that the discharging injuries were sustained serving his country. Our service members are led to believe that if they sustain injuries on active duty that lead to a medical discharge or permanent disability, they will at least have a GI Bill to give them a chance for a successful transition into civilian life. But right now, VA is resting on the technicality of their type of discharge that dismisses service members' injuries, and we need your help to right this wrong. Chairman Levin, Ranking Member Moore, the American Legion appreciates the opportunity to comment on the bills being considered by the subcommittee, and I would be happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Preferis. I now recognize Mr. Romo for 5 minutes.
Good day. I am Lawrence Guzman Romo of the American GI Forum. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony. We have provided detailed written testimony on these proposed bills. We only give highlights in our oral testimony. In general, we recommend the Veterans Administration specify a percentage of overhead costs that can be used when a provider gets a grant. Administrative costs must be contained. The Fly Vets Act bill should be considered for passage as long as the funds are within the allocated budget. The bill to pay certain veterans who receive certain educational assistance a weekly stipend for child care services is a wonderful initiative that we support, but we are concerned of the new costs and have questions which we discussed in our written testimony. The bill to provide for the transfer of entitlement to educational assistance under post 9/11 education assistance program when an eligible individual dies after approval of transfer and before transferring all of the individual's entitlement definitely should be considered for passage as a GI Bill is an earned benefit. The bill to expand eligibility for the Marine Gunnery Sergeant John David Fry Scholarship to include spouses and children of individuals who die from a service-connected disability within 120 days of serving in the armed forces definitely should be passed. The 120-day period is an optimal time period. The bill to prohibit the use of entitlement to educational assistance under the Survivors and Dependents Educational Assistance Program for secondary school education should be clarified. We agree use be prohibited at the secondary level, but must be maintained at the post-secondary level. The bill to have adjustments of grants for comprehensive services programs to serve homeless veterans is a very good bill that we support. This helps providers to optimize funds. The bill for a pilot program on grants for care for elderly homeless veteran is a bill that we fully support. There are comments on our written testimony. The bill to carry out a pilot program on substance use and alcohol use disorder recovery for homeless veterans is fully supported. We have comments in our written testimony. The bill to provide technical assistance to recipients of grants for supportive services for very low income families in permanent housing and comprehensive service programs, we fully support. We have comments in our written testimony. The bill to increase and extend the authorization of appropriations for homeless veterans reintegration programs is an essential bill to pass. We must reduce and eliminate veteran homelessness by increasing and extending the authorization. The bill to extend the limiting period for certain individuals to use educational assistance benefits is definitely a bill that should be considered for passage. This gives veterans more flexibility in using their earned educational benefits. The bill to adjust the rate of per diem payments provided to grantees that provide services to homeless veterans is fully supported. There are comments on a written testimony. The bill to ensure the Secretary of Veterans Affairs repays members of the armed forces for certain contributions made by such members to our post-11 educational assistance is recommended for passage. This bill fairly compensates our veterans. The bill to amend the Service Members Civil Release Act to establish protections under that act for a member of the armed forces relieves a course of education paid for with certain educational assistance to perform certain service is an absolute must bill to pass. This helps veterans financially, academically, and with their wellness. The bill to submit to Congress a report on the shallow subsidy program under supportive services for veteran family programs is an imperative bill to pass. We need a thorough report to see if optimal outreach is being done to our veterans. The bill to carry out a pilot program to improve public transportation services for veterans is a bill that should be considered for passage. The challenge is, what is the ultimate goal with this pilot program? This is discussed in our written testimony. The bill to have a report on the effectiveness of the Warrior Training Advancement Course and whether it should be expanded to other federal agencies is a good bill. We need to ensure the time and funds allocated to this program is enhancing veterans' employment. The bill to expand eligibility for certain work study allowance paid to certain individuals to pursue programs of rehabilitation, education, or training at least a half-time basis is a wonderful bill. This bill gives more flexibility for veterans to increase their income from a work study job. We salute your stellar service and your dedication to enhance the wellness of the veterans community. Thank you, Chairman Levin, and I'm pleased to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Romo, and thanks again to all of our panelists. With that, I recognize myself for 5 minutes to begin our questioning. Mr. Proferis, I'd like to begin with you. I want to thank you for your written testimony regarding my bill to extend the limiting date for use of education assistance benefits. I thought you did a great job of articulating instances in which current law negatively impacts certain veterans seeking to enroll to continue their education. Can you explain to the committee why practically this legislative fix is needed?
Absolutely, Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. This draft legislation, practically what it would do was it would extend the delimiting date for service members, veterans, those with education entitlements who had who their education entitlement was limited because under the old interpretation of the VA's 48-month rule, their VRE time was used against their GI Bill time. And what this does is it eliminates that. And so now they have GI Bill, they're entitled to those benefits. However, because of pre-existing delimiting dates, they can't use them. And so this would help those service members and those using educational benefits utilize those benefits that they're entitled to.
Thank you so much for that. Ms. Augustine, I want to thank you for SBA's testimony in support of my draft bill to create a weekly stipend for childcare for student veterans. And I wanted to also congratulate you on your upcoming new addition to your family, and wanted to thank you for joining us today. As you probably know, President Biden's American Families Plan calls for a long-needed investment in childcare, and this bill helps support that goal by providing a weekly stipend for childcare expenses for our student veterans. Can you please discuss some of the challenges that student veterans face in completing their studies while caring for their families, and how this bill specifically will support those student veterans in fulfilling their education and their family obligations?
Yes, sir. And thank you for the question and the congratulations. Much appreciated. As I said in my testimony, a vast majority of student veterans are parents going back to school. I myself am a parent going back to school, and this type of stipend would be very helpful to addressing some of the gaps in childcare options that are currently available. When we hear from student veterans and chapter leaders about their need around childcare, it's less discussed where they need traditional childcare, so 9 to 5, where they can access a daycare center or some other childcare means. What the real frustration is in some of those non-traditional hours, evenings and weekends, when you're more likely to be tasked with group work or trying to study and do homework. That's the boat that I'm actually in personally. And this type of stipend would allow for greater flexibility to cover that gap in childcare need. We're really excited about it, and we appreciate the overwhelming support we heard from today. We're hoping to see it become more inclusive, as was pointed out by many of my other panelists, and we appreciate the effort that's gone into it thus far.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your comments and your working with us on it as well. Mr. Lewis, I appreciated your testimony regarding the legislation to expand students' eligibility for VA work study. And specifically, the bill reduces the required rate of pursuit from 3/4 to half-time for student veterans to participate in the program. You mentioned in your written statement that this legislative change would open up the program to more service-disabled veterans. Would you please discuss how increasing flexibility and eligibility for VA work study will improve education and employment outcomes for service-disabled student veterans?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. So all of DAV's membership are service-connected, service-disabled veterans. Many of them, because of their service-connected disability, are unable to attend school full-time or even 3/4 time. Reducing that requirement to half-time would allow them to both go to school, pursue their education, but also participate in this work study program. So DAV strongly supports this legislation.
Terrific. Well, thank you all very much for your continued collaboration. It's always an honor to work with our BSOs as we're crafting these bills. Next, I'd like to turn to the Ranking Member Moore, for his questions. Go right ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Haycock, this first question will be for you. In your testimony, you voiced support for the draft bill titled the Fry Scholarship Enhancement Act of 2021. Can you please elaborate on what expanding this benefit will do for survivors, spouses, and children?
Sure. So long term, we would love to see Chapter 35 sunset and move all surviving spouses and children into the Fry Scholarship. But this particular bill allows for those who die in the first 120 days from their last day of active duty service eligibility. Those families are treated as kind of a gray area survivor. For most benefits, they are treated as if they had died while on active duty, such as for TRICARE for Life, they receive the death gratuity, they receive every other benefit. But because of how VA has defined active duty in the past, it does exclude these families. And so while they may consider themselves active duty survivors, based on the definition of active duty that VA currently has, does not allow for it.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Proffers, this would be a question for you, please, sir. Can you please tell us why you believe HR 4874 is a measured compromise to close the flight school loophole, which is still helping veterans access flight training.
Thank you, Representative Moore. We support the draft legislation because, as I said in my oral testimony, the American Legion supports spending public funds responsibly. And what this would do would cap that tuition so that we can spend those public dollars responsibly and ensure that they're being spent that way, while also not dissuading those using educational benefits to attend flight school. And so by not only capping, but also not dissuading those using educational entitlements, we believe it's a good measured approach.
Thanks, sir. And also on this next question, it'll be for Ms. Augustine and Mr. Proffers. And Ms. Augustine, you can go first if you like, but can you please tell us why you believe it is important to pass a draft bill that would refund service members' investment in the Montgomery GI Bill when they complete their use of the GI Bill eligibility?
Yes, sir, absolutely. So this is an overlooked loophole in the repayment options available to students who exhaust their Montgomery GI Bill and are then eligible for a repayment of the $1,200 that they paid into the system. Currently, that $1,200 is paid out on the last monthly housing allowance that the VA sends to a student veteran. However, if you exhaust your Montgomery GI Bill while on active duty and therefore not receiving a VA monthly housing allowance, you have no mechanism to receive that repayment option. This bill closes that loophole, addresses the need to make sure that all students who are eligible to receive that repayment are doing so. Thank you.
Mr. Proffers, please, sir.
Thank you, sir. We believe, the American Legion believes, that service members and veterans who invested that $1,200 in that first year of service towards their Montgomery GI Bill should get a full refund. And the VA in 2009 instituted that policy. However, there's a loophole because they tied it to the last payment for housing. And so what this draft legislation would do is fix that loophole. And for that reason, we support it.
Thank you, Mr. Proffers, and thanks. I appreciate all the panelists for participating today. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I will return it back to you.
I thank the ranking member for his questions. And next, I'd like to recognize my friend from New Hampshire, Representative Pappas.
Well, thank you very much, Chairman Levin and Ranking Member Moore, for holding this session today. I appreciate the members we heard from earlier and our veteran advocates who are on this panel here for your perspectives. They're so valuable. One issue I wanted to highlight is the issue of transportation. And maybe Mr. Lewis, I could start with you on this particular issue. I hear about this from veterans and people who support veterans all across my district about the lack of access to VA care, to appointments for our veterans because of the transportation issue. We know that telehealth obviously has been a game changer. It's emerged as a suitable alternative for many, but it's not always a convenient option for veterans who might not have the technology, might not have the access to affordable broadband in their community. The lack of public transportation infrastructure has a disproportionate impact on veterans in my district who live in rural communities or require the type of in-person visits that many veterans do. So this dynamic, I think, also helps perpetuate the issue of veteran homelessness. I know our VA in Manchester has cited transportation to grocery stores as one of the top issues facing veterans experiencing homelessness in my district. So that's why I'm supporting the public transportation pilot program being considered today, which would require VA to launch a 5-year pilot to provide grants to states, counties, and cities to create, maintain, or expand public transportation options for veterans. I'm wondering, Mr. Lewis, if you could talk about how this pilot program might address the issues that I talked about, and with the country reopening and getting back to in-person services, what other avenues should we be exploring to help make sure that we're doing all we can to ensure that there are transportation options available?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Congressman. It's an important issue. As you noted, access to VA services has been and continues to be one of the major problems that veterans face. And it's not only veterans in rural areas, but there are veterans in some suburban areas who can't access, say, VA medical centers or CBOCs or other VA services like that. This draft legislation that creates the pilot program that helps with public transportation, and I think it has the potential to have a huge impact for veterans. DAV's strongly supporting this, and we're hopeful that it'll make a huge difference to our veterans.
Well, thanks for sharing that. And I don't know if you have any thoughts on how the pandemic impacted your members or other veterans, given that some of the traditional modes of transportation might not have been available to them. Any sort of reflections on the pandemic and how that might have impacted veteran transportation?
Yes, sir. So you're right. As you know, a lot of public transportation, they reduced the number of lines or the times, and a lot of veterans, especially homeless veterans, they depend on that public transportation. Telehealth has been huge, but as you pointed out, a lot of homeless veterans, they don't have access to either computer or broadband internet, but not only homeless veterans, but veterans in rural areas as well. So yes, we are hoping that this legislation will change that circumstance as well.
Terrific. Thanks for your comments. Ms. Monet, in the remaining time, I wondered if I could turn to you to talk about eliminating the VA capital grant matching requirement. We know that some of the best partners we have to fight and end veteran homelessness are nonprofits and other organizations that provide temporary housing and other services through VA's capital grant award program. The 35% matching funds requirement, the per diem, the grant and per diem recipients pay to secure the grant is too high for many organizations. We've seen a waiver through the pandemic that really has helped. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are of waiving this matching requirement moving forward and how that might impact the availability of support for veterans.
So NCHV strongly supports that provision because the provision was so limiting. I think, during the pandemic, it has been a struggle for these providers and programs to just continue operations, never mind trying to find a 35% match to a grant in order to create better structures and facilities for veterans. And I think moving forward, waiving that match will encourage more providers to take advantage of this opportunity, because ultimately what we want and our goal, right, is to have safe, dignified facilities for the veterans who come in to use them. And, federal funding is a really great support for that. And anything that we can do to encourage more organizations to take advantage of this opportunity is great, right? I mean, the VA Grant and Per Diem program released a NOFO last year, and they funded, I think, about 1,000 beds to be reconfigured into better space. There's another one out on the streets right now, but I think at the start of the pandemic, there were about 8,000 beds that really were in highly congregate settings, and that's worrisome. So I think anything that we can do to support more organizations taking advantage of this opportunity is a good thing.
Thank you for those comments. My time is up, so I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Pappas. And now I'd like to recognize my friend from Maryland, Representative Trone.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing. We've got a great number of excellent pieces of legislation before us today. Last week, I had the privilege of spending the day with Secretary McDonough, and we visited our veterans in Frederick and Gaithersburg and Potomac. And the message was really clear. In order to serve our veterans, we need to invest in our VA infrastructure, expand services, and increase the number of people serving our vets. We're here today to discuss a number of bills that help our veterans, but I have to mention that this committee just last week invested $18 billion for our veterans. That's a lot of money going to do a lot of good things for our vets. So let's discuss some of today's bills. Mr. Lewis, your testimony, you indicated that 70% of the homeless veterans suffer from substance use disorder. That's an astounding number. You also shared that the resources remain the same while the need is steadily increasing. What resources do you require to meet this increased need? Is it more providers, more locations to seek treatment, or something else?
Thank you for that question. Yeah, that's a really important question. Actually, another member of our staff is the expert when it comes to that. And what I can do is take that question down and get back to you in writing with specifics on our recommendations.
Okay, well, that'd be helpful. We'd appreciate if you get that to us. And can you talk a little bit more about Representative Horsford's pilot program to help improve substance use disorder for the vets?
Yes, sir. So as you pointed out, it's a high number of homeless veterans report substance use disorder. We feel like this pilot program would be a huge help in getting those veterans the help that we need. I'd also like to reiterate that the recent events in Afghanistan and the events commemorating the 20th anniversary of September 11th, this has aroused a lot of emotions with veterans of all eras, which could lead to mental health problems, but also substance use disorders. So VA has a responsibility to keep their eye out for problems like this increasing.
Right, we're averaging almost 20 suicides a day by our veterans, and women veterans are 6 times more likely to commit suicide than the average woman in America. So this, with Secretary McDonough, it was crystal clear, this connectivity between addiction, substance use, and all the mental health challenges with PTSD and the trauma that our vets have seen. So I just would like to continue to push for Representative Horsford's program. This pilot program really makes a lot of sense, and it could help us improve, substance use disorder, which of course is with their step by step with mental health disorders. So if you get back to us with some of your ideas, we've got to do better, I think, in the SUD area. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Representative Trone. I don't see any other members who are on with questions, going once, going twice. So if there are no further questions, we can bring this hearing to a close. I want to thank our witnesses who have joined us today, and I thank the ranking member as well. All members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include additional materials. Without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.